Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome, Mary. I'm Christy Lynch. I'm the nonfiction editor at BookPage, where we connect readers with their next great book. Welcome to another thrilling installment of our author interview series. I have with me today the great and good Mary Roach. You know her, you love her. She is the author of 6 best-selling books about everything from the alimentary canal to the afterlife. And now Fuzz, When Nature Breaks the Law, is her 7th book. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Christy. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm very excited to talk to you. I'm a big fan. I don't think that's cool to say, but it's the truth.
Well, it's definitely cool by me.
Great. So for those who might be watching today who have not yet heard about your latest book, will you start by telling us a little bit about what it's about?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, Fuzz is a book about humans and wild animals kind of getting in each other's business. And when I say when nature breaks the law, I'm talking about our laws. So these are animals committing crimes like murder, manslaughter, breaking and entering, home invasion, trespassing, vandalism, jaywalking. These are the things that animals do. Obviously, they don't know that there are laws. They're just animals going about their lives, trying to eat, trying to find food, trying to find a mate, trying to find a nice warm place to stay. And sometimes, your attic seems like that to them. So, and then what can we do? What can we do about it? And specifically, what can science professionals do to kind of prevent these conflicts, these wildlife crimes? So that's what the book is about.
Yeah. So despite being perhaps one of the world's most popular science writers, people often call you a science writer, you actually only have journalistic training and not necessarily scientific training, right?
Not even journalistic.
No training. No training, just a rogue.
Just a rogue nitwit. Yeah. Flailing around, making a pest of myself. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no. We're here to hear from you. There's no such thing as interrupting me today. What initially drew you to writing about what might be considered scientific topics?
Well, I started out writing, I graduated with a liberal arts degree, and I didn't have, like as I mentioned, I didn't have any training in journalism. And I ended up as a copy editor, because you do learn in college how to string a sentence together, and you can kind of get up to speed and do that. But I wasn't very good as a copy editor. I didn't have that attention to detail. I'm not the kind of person who can kind of keep track of, how was that capitalized in chapter 2? And are we consistent throughout the book? I would be like, no one will notice. So temperamentally not well suited to copy editing. And also came, because I was copy editing books, came to think, well, I think some ways it would be easier for me to write in the first place than to try to, edit other people's work. So I started thinking about writing and wrote sort of general interest articles for the local San Francisco Chronicle Examiner Sunday magazine. But so I was a general reporter. I wasn't doing any science. And then I got, my editor moved on to a more science related publication. And I wrote for them for a long time. They covered health, the human body, medicine. It was called Hippocrates. It doesn't exist anymore, but they were really fun to work for. And I really enjoyed science and medicine were fascinating to me on the level that I was covering them, obviously not in great detail or depth, but I found it fascinating. And I just stayed on that path and started eventually writing for Discover magazine. I also spent a few years doing a lot of feature stories for Discover, and that was fairly random. It was just the editor contacting me and saying, would you be interested in writing a couple features for us? So I was very passive about the whole thing. It wasn't a goal. It wasn't something I set out to do. I kind of just followed, like I liked working with one editor and they moved somewhere else and I worked with them there and then I worked with them somewhere else. And that is kind of sad to say, but that's how my career was shaped, was by these relationships with editors. And I think that happens a fair amount. I mean, I think other people perhaps do have more of a goal in life, but I was pretty goalless, shall we say, just trying to have fun, write some stories.
Well, it seems to have worked out fine.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the opening chapter of Fuzz that one of the co-founders of the Wildlife Human Attack Response Training, while giving a talk, speaking so loudly that he reached a 79 on the Decibel meter app on your phone. And what I want to know is, you have a Decibel meter app on your phone?
I do. I love that thing. I do. And I'll sometimes in a restaurant, I'll turn it on. I'll be like, these workers, people who work here, they're going to get hearing loss. This started from Grunt because I'd had a chapter on military hearing loss in the military, which is the #1 Veterans Administration medical complaint, because these are people who are exposed to obviously very loud things, not just bombs and guns and things, but being in an armored personnel carrier, which is super loud for hours, and they often don't want to wear hearing protection because they want their situational awareness. Anyway, I got interested in hearing loss and how it happens. And so I started actually just going around and measuring decibel levels. And I'm kind of annoying to my husband because I'll be like, wow, I can actually, this fan, I think this fan is so loud, it's going to give us hearing loss if we leave it on all night. So yeah, I have a decibel. It's a simple, it's a free download. It's just,
sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any other weird stuff on your phone that helps you do your sometimes weird job?
I've got a few things like Plant Snap. I love to identify wildflowers and plants, but that's not really weird. Do I have anything weird? No, just kind of nerdy science things, night sky. And there's a birding app, the Cornell birding app. I forget what it's called, but nothing, I don't have like a cadaver nose. There are things that I know that I like, technologies that I heard about when I've reported books. But I don't think any of them exist in apps. So no, I wish I had something more fabulously weird on my phone.
So
I have a lot of weird photographs, though.
That's what I mentioned. Read Page, who read our interview with you September issue, may remember that you mentioned offhand having many pictures of animal genitalia on your phone in case anybody wanted to see those.
I have those. Yeah, I have. I've got. Yeah, yeah. You can't imagine what's on my phone. I have some. Yeah, we don't need to go into it here.
That's fair. So you mentioned when you were describing the premise of this book, and I think as becomes clear pretty soon when you start reading it, the issues in this book are as much about managing humans as they are about managing wildlife.
Yeah.
For example, trying to get people to comply with bear-proof trash can regulations in Aspen, or trying to manage the public's perception of what's the best way to deal with animals that have imposed themselves on nation. Yeah, can you talk about an example of humans getting in our own way when it comes to doing what's best for the animals we ultimately want to protect?
Well, sure. I mean, I think sometimes what people have done with the best of intentions, they've, historically, a lot of this is historical, but when they have a problem with an animal, there's too many of them, they're raiding crops, they're eating grains, whatever it is they're doing. People have thought, well, what if we just bring in an animal that eats that animal? And then that causes life to be really good for those animals that have been brought in. They're like, hey, lots to eat here. But you know what? There's better things to eat here. For example, like the problem in New Zealand, which I talk about in the book, where there were people who imported rabbits to make their new homeland feel more like Europe, like where they'd come from. And so the rabbits did what rabbits do, and they multiplied. And then the rabbits were just decimating the fields and the crops. So they're like, let's bring in some stoats and weasels to kill the rabbits, which, they were thinking, let's do this in a biological way. Well, they were also trapping and shooting them. But what happened is they brought in these stoats and weasels, and New Zealand is a land of flightless birds. So these animals looked around and kind of said, well, yeah, there's rabbits and they're okay, but there's all these delicious eggs and little tiny birds that never fly away from you. So there's a tremendous number of species have gone extinct. Anyway, humans have created their own problems in some cases, in many cases. Not always with bad intent, or sometimes with the best of intentions, but it's often a human behavior change that can be the best course of action, rather than trying to change the animal's behavior.
Sort of related to that, you write about how people tend to fight hardest for wildlife that is big and beautiful, or tall, or loud, or cute. More mountain lions and whales and redwood trees, and less minnows and clover, for example.
Yeah.
Did you encounter some of that same bias when you were selecting the subjects to include in your book?
Well, I tried to include some of both. I was actually trying for a mix of crimes. So obviously there's not a lot of birds and rodents that are committing manslaughter. They are more along the lines of agricultural theft. So I do have a mix of both of them. I think readers are more interested, in the large, beautiful, charismatic megafauna, as they're called, the bears and the mountain lions. But I did want to, I spend a fair amount of time talking about birds and rodents, because I think because we use the word pest, I think it gives people permission to not really think about these creatures as animals that are really, as intelligent in many cases, and as some of the more larger, more beautiful animals, and that deserve humane treatment. I mean, I understand that they're pests, and that they're causing agricultural damage, but I think that by treating them as just pests, we're too quick to just slaughter large numbers of them, which actually doesn't work well either. It's not an effective way to deal with the problem. But I did want to kind of raise people's awareness a little bit about these creatures. They're not just pests; they're animals. They're as much a living and beautiful creature as a mountain lion or a bear. Some of these birds that are considered pests. I mean, I'm a birder, and so it's kind of sad to hear about some of the stories from the 30s and 40s when they would do crow bombing. They would go and string dynamite through a roost, during the day when the crows were gone, and then the crows would come back and they'd set it off. I mean, it was just this, and it did not lower the amount of agricultural damage. It barely made a dent in the population. It was just kind of a brutal thing to do. But because people they're like agricultural pests, they're not birds, they're pests. So I'd like, people to move away from that way of thinking about these little guys. So I did want to include them in the book. Plus, they allowed me to round out my criminal menu of different activities, rather than just.
But there are probably a more limited number of people who have found themselves in a situation where they have to decide what to do about a bear that they are up against. The number of people who have to decide what to do about a mouse in their cabinet is, of course, much greater. So important. And they were moving. I mean, I'm already sympathetic toward pesky animals, but but I loved, this new light on them, and to sort of put them on the same level as megafauna and monkeys and leopards, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's, I mean, the fact that you can still buy glue traps when there are, there's, a snap trap is, it seems kind of brutal, but it's a quick death. So it's much more humane than a glue trap. And the fact that those are everywhere still, it's like, can we just not sell glue traps anymore, Amazon? Can't we just not do that?
They don't in some countries, right?
In some countries, yes, in some countries, that's right. I forget where, but some countries in Europe, and I used to have this in my head. But yes, there are some countries that don't. Of course, you can go on the internet and find them, but I wish that there was more of an awareness about that.
Mm. You can also, it reminds me of, speaking of rounding out your menu of criminal activity and criminals, there is a chapter about beans and beans that can be poisonous. And yes, one of my greatest takeaways from that is that even illegal, you can find it on the internet. If you're looking to make ricin, for example. Anyway,
that was kind of an eye opener that not only can you find, you can find castor beans. Most people don't have the expertise or equipment to extract pure ricin from a castor bean. There's various people on the internet who will give you instructions, but not always particularly accurate. But what more surprised me was that there's chemical supply houses that if you look up there's a certain ID number for ricin, there's people going, ricin 99% pure, order now. So I actually, got in touch with these people. I didn't want to actually order it because that would put me, I think, on some kind of FBI watch list. Mm-hmm. But I was kind of trying to sound them out, and they were like, well, and how much would you need? We don't have it in stock right now, but tell me. So it's kind of amazing.
It's on back order, but we'll add you to our wait list.
Yeah, exactly. That chapter, by the way, came about because the book was originally titled Animal Vegetable Criminal. Yeah. And so my editor, Jill, who I adore, she's like, Mary, we need more vegetable matter. You don't have enough vegetable. And I'm like, well, it's just sort of a symbolic sort of, nature. She's like, no, I really think you need to justify the word vegetable. So anyway, I added that chapter after the fact, but then we ended up changing the name because another book came out with a similar title, Mark Bittman's Food History, which was called Animal Vegetable Junk. So we changed. I mean, Fuzz is fine. Fuzz was on my book proposal. It is my title, but anyway, that's why the beans ended up in there. I think otherwise we wouldn't have beans in the book.
Well, I do think that they enhance it. I'm glad that I got to read a chapter about beans that can kill you, a thing I did not previously know was possible. You mentioned in a note that when you were in your 20s, you worked at the San Francisco Zoo. First of all, I'm curious what you did there. I assume you were not a herpetology keeper or anything like that. But I wonder how formative that experience was, and if you think it created any of the ripples that led to your interest in your latest book.
Yeah, well, to answer the first part of your question, I worked in the public affairs office. So I was the person dealing with the media and writing press releases, writing things for the membership society. It was actually the San Francisco Zoological Society, which raised funds for the zoo. That I worked in the zoo, but not for the actual civic organization of the zoo. But anyway, that's a minor detail. So I spent a lot of time writing about goings on at the zoo, which was tremendously fun. And I think that probably did stick in the back of my head as a really fun gig. I worked there about a year and I worked in a trailer by Gorilla World, which was, my idea of a fun workplace. It was just, you could hear the Simanx hooting around sunset. There were peacocks wandering around the grounds. It was, for an office job, about as good as it got. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I think that stayed with me because I get to write about things like, okay, when the elephant at one point had a plantar wart on its foot, and they were bringing in a surgeon who was doing laser surgery. I mean, this is a big plantar wart. So for me to be able to be there on the scene while they're removing a wart from the foot of an elephant, yeah, that was probably a formative moment where I got to step into the world that I otherwise wouldn't know about, or just, hanging out in the zoo kitchen with the guy who has all the menus for what you make to feed all the animals. That, I was able to write about those folks. And I think that that was very early on. I just got out of college. So probably you're right. That probably did stay with me.
Speaking of footnotes, I think it is worth mentioning to people who have not yet read the book that this is not the sort of book where you can take or leave the footnotes. And I think that they are worth pausing a moment to read. Some of the most tantalizing details that I came across in this book. Footnotes. One of the ones that comes most readily to my mind was the one about how biologists acquire monkey sperm to study for research, because that is some jobs in the world.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. That woman was hilarious. Yeah.
Good. She'd have to be.
Yes.
With a job like that. So there were a few times in Fuzz when you tell people, where you write about what the person's professional title is on a particular animal expert's business card, because it is usually ridiculous. Do you have a favorite animal expert title that you encountered during your research?
I really liked bear manager, because it's this combination of bears and also, I'm in mid-level management. I'm hoping to move up to a supervisory position, but right now I'm a junior level bear manager. Sure. It had a wonderful, just a kind of exotic but also mundane ring to it. I think that one was pretty great. I also liked the Danger Tree Faller Blaster. It's like, first of all, Danger Tree is hilarious to me. I mean, you'll see if you read the chapter that trees can be killers, and there is that as a technical term, danger tree, but also just faller is a what they call lumberjacks up in Canada. They're called fallers, not loggers and not lumberjacks. So there's, the business card will be like falling supervisor, like the guy keeps falling over. They don't think it's funny because that's what they're used to it. But I was like, your card says falling supervisor.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
While chatting with one of my coworkers at BookPage before today's interview, she described your books as books you didn't even know that you wanted to read until you heard the premise and saw that it was by Mary Roach, which I think is pretty accurate. I wonder, how do you know when you've hit upon a good subject for a book, especially now that you've written 7?
Yeah, that's actually the hardest part for me in what I do, is to find the new topic, because it has to be something that will hold my interest for a couple of years, 2-3 years, and it has to. But I also, I want it to be something that is interesting to a broad range of people. And I'm the kind of person that if I see something that's a world that I don't know anything about it, that's appealing to me. Like Grunt was a book about military science, particularly keeping people alive. It was not the science of weapons, it was the human side of it. And the part of that, why that it was interesting to me, is that I don't have any family in the military. I've never served in the military. It's a universe that's completely foreign, and that's really appealing to me. But that's sometimes, people more, I think people often want to read about the things they already know about, like, oh, I'm interested in animals, so I'll read this, or I have a curiosity about macabre things, so I'll read Stiff. So sometimes that, it's hard for me to gauge what people will or won't be willing to step into. I have to hope that if they liked one of my books, they'll try a book on a topic that they don't perceive themselves as being at all interested in. So I think it's different, a writer versus a reader. I mean, I get to sort of step into the world and go and meet these people, and that's all, exciting and different. But will the reader take that step with me, I guess, is the thing I have to try to gauge. And I'm not very good at it. I just write them and put them out there and hope for the best.
Well, I think that once you've read one of your books, it becomes easier to get interested in topics, I mean, that you otherwise would not be interested in. When I read Gulp with a book club of mine years ago, and one of our, I think that was the first book of yours that I'd read, and one of the other book club members suggested, and people were like, "You want to read a book about digestion?" And they're like, "No, but it's by Mary Roach." And we were like, "Well, what does that mean?" So we read it, and then we're like, "I understand. You mean that it will be funny and interesting, and we will care what we normally care about."
I know. I think like there's actually almost nothing in that book about digestion. There's all this weird chewing stuff, and like how much can the stomach hold before it bursts, and 3 chapters on flatulence, elements of it you wouldn't have thought about. So there's almost nothing about nutrition or digestion, so it is all stuff on the canal, definitely. Mm-hmm. But I think the subjects of books often work against me, because people are like, I don't want to read about fill in the blank, unless they have a sense of what I tend to do with the topic, and then they'll be like, oh, that could be pretty bizarre. So yeah, it is tough. You almost want to have a little warning on the book that says, it isn't what you think. This isn't a straightforward, dull book, I promise you.
Right. Yeah, one of the reasons that I think that your books succeed at being both very informational and at the same time incredibly entertaining and fun to read is the fact that you include yourself as a character in them. This approach for a lot of strictly scientists and journalists, I think, would be anathema, but you just tell stories in the first person, or you offer anecdotes about your own mistakes and foibles as you go, such as in this book, the time that you ate a little nibble of specially formulated mouse bait while you were interviewing the wildlife biologist who's working on genetically modified mice. Yes, you said it tasted like suntan lotion, and then offered you some gum. But I wonder, as a non-scientist science writer, how common is it for you to commit a faux pas while reporting?
Oh, all the time, mostly in the form of asking really stupid questions, because I don't have a background in, and each chapter I'm stepping into kind of a new pocket of science. So I have no shame about coming across as ill-informed, because I am. I don't, I'm turning to this person to be my tour guide to this universe. So I'm going to be asking really simple questions. I'm going to get things wrong. I'm going to, like in Grunt, I was looking at this new, very safer armored personnel carrier, where they've done all these things to make it safer if it drives over a bomb. And I'm looking at the interior, and it's very stripped down. And I go, oh, it's so great that they put cup holders in. And the guy goes, Mary, those are rifle holders. Like, I don't know. And I do that all the time. Yeah.
Well, yes, it makes it a little more heartwarming to read about. Somebody relatable for the non-scientist reader. Although I wonder, have you ever considered writing a book outside of the science and nature categories? perhaps a little.
Yes, yeah. I think about it all. I think about it all the time. I would love to write a book where you go down a rabbit hole and stay in there for the whole 250 pages, and it's some mystery that you're trying to figure out, and you bring in other elements of that relate to it, but you have this through line like so many authors manage to do. But I don't know, I don't have those goggles on. I don't ever find that. But yeah, I do think about that, and I would love to try that sometime. But those narratives, if you tend to stumble upon those when somebody else has already written it up, right? So how do you find that? I'm not very good at that. So if anybody has one, let me know.
An unsolved mystery, they'll write.
Yeah, exactly. Some kind of unsolved, not necessarily a crime mystery, but some mystery that takes you on this path. Those are wonderful books to read, and it must be very fun to write as well. So yeah, I think about it all the time.
Yeah. There's an appendix at the back of Fuzz called Resources for Homeowners, with some humane suggestions and further reading about what to do when humans encounter ants in and around their homes. Is there anything about your own relationship with animals that has changed since writing this book?
I'm aware now that there are, like say you, excuse me, if you're dealing with, say, squirrels or raccoons that have gotten into your attic or your basement, particularly an attic space, and they're nesting. I'm just more aware of options. Like there are people, there's things that you can do to exclude animals to prevent the problem from happening. Rodents can fit through a space smaller than their head, and they have entertainingly proved this, as I mentioned in the book. But there's products that you can fill spaces with. I mean, you can keep them out. There's ways to prevent this sort of thing rather than dealing with a problem when there's already an infestation. There's already an animal that's given birth, and now you've got babies in the mix. But even then, there are wildlife control operators that specialize in dealing with if there's a brood or a litter that's already been born. You don't want to just seal it off, because you might seal the babies in while the mother is out gathering food, and now that's not humane. That's not nice. So that they can put a one-way door so that everybody gets out, and then just let them go on the property. They don't have to take them away. Just seal up the hole. So there's all these options now that I wasn't aware of, and that's kind of what the appendix is about. I mean, the book is not a how-to per se, but there are resources that are really helpful, and also people that you can hire to deal with it in a humane way. And there's solutions that don't require just poisoning or trapping or killing animals that have found your property to be appealing for one reason or another.
Right. Yeah, the way I did this multiple times since I read it, where your description of a field that's being invaded, birds maybe who are coming by and eating corn and that sort of thing. From the bird's perspective, you have opened a restaurant and
yes,
are just pulling up to eat.
Yeah. And it's tough sometimes in cities because it's your neighbors that are doing that. You're like, we have a neighbor who loves to feed the birds, and she just dumps the bird seed on the ground, which attracts pigeons and roof rats and various other creatures, but she loves to do it. And we haven't had any success in getting her to do it in a different way. So, it just comes down to compromise, living in the city, realizing there's going to be some little hassles that will be there. It's not a huge problem. I just, what are you going to do?
They live here too.
They live, yeah. Your neighbors live here too.
Well, I was thinking the rats and birds live here.
The pigeons, yeah, right. Yeah. They do too, right. Yeah.
Well, Thank you so much for signing on for a little while to talk to us today. I really encourage everybody to go pick up a copy of this one. And if it's your first, you've got a wonderful backlist of topics to make you feel smarter while you're giggling alone in your room. A wonderful combination. Thank you so much, and can't wait for your next one. Hopefully it'll be a deep dive.
Thank you so much, Christy. I enjoyed it.
Thanks.